background, I think, to understand why I write papers that way. I have a kind of a lifelong preoccupation with interdisciplinarity. And even as an undergraduate, certainly in graduate school, I sort of strained at the disciplinary boundaries between psychology, literature, and phenomenology. And the psychology part means that, yeah, that's the part of me initially that became concerned with dream studies, and in particular, impactful dream studies. So I worked, Tor Nielsen was a student in my laboratory before he took his position at Montreal. And the things that we did together were right at the heart of experimental dream studies. And yet, as he can attest, there was in the background already a kind of preoccupation with structure of literature and its relation with the structure of dream narratives. And for me, and almost necessarily in the background, I became acquainted with phenomenology, partly for methodological reasons, partly because 20th century phenomenology, I think, is a very rich conceptual source, especially for talking about metaphor. So if you think I write in a way that's virtually inaccessible, try Paul Ricoeur at some point in his book on metaphor. Very difficult. I also think very important. And I guess what I'm trying to say is hear a little bit in the background about what drives my interdisciplinarity, what makes me sort of tread on the boundary between philosophy of science, literary studies, and phenomenology of dreams as well. So, so let me start by touching a little bit on the philosophy of science, okay? One of the opening motifs in the paper that I circulated is methodological. I say something like, you know, people who are interested in dreams that hang around and affect you after you've awakened for some time, quite often. People who do that in their research often think about what dimensions describe the experience of these dreams and make them so impactful. So Ernest Hartman, for example, is especially concerned about the intensity of central images. If you remember that in his work, it's a recurrent focus in his writing. But he had that dimensional approach. It was the intensity of the dream, basically, that made the difference. And in quite a bit of my work, and in what you see in that paper, I try to turn readers in the direction of typological research. In other words, categories of experience, not dimensions of experience. And so the way I set my task in earlier days of the dream research is a little bit like classifying flowers. And I thought, I don't want to know the dimensions of the flowers. I want to know their types. I want to know the difference between one species of iris and another species of iris. And there's a technology that goes with that. It's called cluster analysis in some of its earlier versions, and that's why you see it in my work earlier as well as more recently. But it's a way of asking questions about types rather than dimensions. So I ended up with a couple of students who were working closely with me with a typology of impactful dreams. And people can look at that typology and so they can sometimes recognize themselves in it, or if not only themselves, dreams of a number of kinds that they have heard from others. So it's not as though it's a foreign language, although existential dreams, transcendent dreams, nightmares, now that's more familiar, right? So that typology, I think, requires some worrying initially, because I'm trying to change the direction a little bit of the way we ask questions about these big dreams. I'm trying to change it in the direction of different types rather than different dimensions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and you have in your paper outlines 3 types of impactful dreams, and I can see that the direction that you're going to just kind of get people to think about different categories.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, that those different types of dream don't just derive from 2 or 3 studies. We've done a series of them now. I don't know the exact number, but those types are replicable, and you see in some of the laborious opening sentences of the paper that they can be contrasted on a variety of attributes, such as whether they end on a very intense note, whether they have some kind of transformation in them, whether they emphasize one or another visual or one or another imaginal modality. So they can be compared across quite an array of attributes, not single dimensions, but quite an array of attributes. And I think that's important. So if you're more or less at ease with that general orientation, then let me tell you what I think is another point that we ought to consider, and it reflects something about what I just said. Because when you start to do typological studies, in effect, you're saying to yourself and others, one of these things is not like the other, right? They fit in different categories, different containers, etc. And fairly early in this research, I began to notice something that put nightmares in a category that was differentiable from what I call existential dreams and transcendent dreams. As dramatically different as existential dreams and transcendent dreams are affectively, they do have one especially important attribute in common. And we would never have found this if we hadn't done the typological studies in the way we did. But we now, I think, have fairly certainly established that existential dreams and transcendent dreams, but not nightmares, commonly have this kind of dual awareness, almost like they're 2 centers of my awareness of the world of the dream. And it's tempting to turn quickly to the language of dream lucidity. But there's, by the way, there's good reason for doing that with transcendent dreams, but there isn't such good reason for doing that with existential dreams. You get that dual attunement in both existential dreams and in transcendent dreams, but it's not lucidity in the existential dreams, especially. Okay.
I was interested.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just interested in the 3 types. I was looking at that and wondering if you were saying that these 3 categories are the only ones you found for impactful dreams, or if they're, so I've got lots of questions. So that was one of the, it's like, how many different types are there? Because the second question I had was about existential dreams. It seems like the existential dreams that you're talking about all have an affect that's really quite a sad despairing. And I wondered if you had existential dreams that were filled with connection. And so I was trying to think about whether the classic visitation dream would fit into an existential framework, because it really is about kind of how we are living our lives and how we're connected on those deepest levels. But they don't often have that kind of despair and sadness, I guess, that you were talking about.
It's interesting that you bring up the visitation theme, because in some of our earlier work, we were getting dream reports of people who had experienced significant loss.
Mm-hmm.
And they were often rather exceptional dreams in which the person who died visited them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And often they were reassuring. So it's like the deceased person might say something fairly common in this kind of dream. Yeah, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't despair. Don't be so endlessly distraught. I'm okay. That did not hold up as an existential dream. In other words, other characteristics of
Right.
those dreams separated them into another type.
So is there another type then beyond the nightmare, the existential, and transcendent? Because I wouldn't call them transcendent dreams either. There's something kind of in between.
Well, say a little bit more about that.
Well, they're definitely impactful. They're definitely meaningful. The visitation dreams, people can wake up from them and feel like they have a new sense of themselves and how they fit in the world and what the world is about, and a sense of spirituality. But they don't, the transcendent piece, if there was transcendence, it was mostly connected here, this sense of immanence rather than transcendence, of they are with me, I am connected to them, and my life has changed because of that connection, but not so much a sense of I have seen more than what I usually see in my life.
Yeah. Now, two things come to mind in response to your question. One is, you were asking how many types there might be and whether there are more than the three basic types that I talk about. And the answer is, almost by definition, with this methodology, the answer is yes. Okay. And initially, we separated a couple of other types of dreams, like the visitation dreams. We separated them, and thinking that a lot depends on whether they show up in a replicable manner in the next study and the next one. So we gradually found that there was stability among these three, and yet from study to study, there were other types in there, right? In other words, study X had the kinds of visitation dreams that you're talking about, including their somewhat transcendent character, right? Maybe in a different way than I'm talking about as transcendent dreams, but there also was a kind of vitality recovered that might be what we now call enthralling, along with sublime enthrallment. So there were other dreams, and they sometimes occurred in small groups, but in our studies, at least, they didn't replicate. Now, mind you, we now have an array of questions that we've asked repeatedly, and we may not have asked all the right questions. So somebody else might say, okay, we need to broaden that impactful dreams questionnaire so that it includes themes X and Y and Z, right? Kuiken, you missed it because you didn't include those items, right? And that would be perfectly appropriate as far as I'm concerned. Yes, it might be quite fascinating, in fact, to do that. if somebody has the will and the
Yeah,
stamina.
yeah.
But
Well, tell me more about this transcendent and the existential then. What are those qualities?
can we hold on that one till
Sure.
later? Because I think um, it's rather important to link that to the discussion of sublime feeling.
Okay.
All right. At least the way I want to talk about existential dreams is that they transition into sublime disquietude.
Hmm.
Transcendent dreams transition into sublime enthrallment. And we can talk about how I use that terminology, and how I think it could be understood with the help of Ricoeur and others.
Sure.
So I think we might want to save some space in here. I know we have limited time, but save some space in our hour to talk a little bit more about sublime feeling, and maybe especially sublime enthrallment in the way we just touched on. Okay. So let's come back to that one, okay?
Mhm.
But if I've understood us in conversation so far, a typological orientation, not a problem. But boy, it doesn't present answers as though you can somehow rest easily with them. There is room for extending the typology, just like there's room for extending the categories of wildflowers that my uncle at South Dakota State University was an expert on. And he had taxonomy in place, you know. People do that with flowers and animals all the time. Psychologists do that, especially when they're clinical psychologists. They do that a lot. Don't do it so much when they're quotes oriented toward basic research. Right? But so there's certainly more to do, and your suggestions also tell me that you should do some of it. But that just means, okay, I'm trying to say what I think I know about the replicability of that typology without closing the door to the possibility that there are other types lurking out there. Okay. But let me turn the corner here by saying we already know something about that with nightmares, don't we? We know that there's a difference between types of nightmares. In other words, the PTSD nightmares and the nightmares that come with sort of chronic nightmare distress. They're somewhat different beasts. They're somewhat different species of dream. And I think there's been a struggle to clarify those differences. In the typology that I'm working with, they tend to be tucked away in the same category, right? Another place where maybe there is more to be done on that one for sure, all right? But so far, at least, it does look like nightmares in general, some PTSD, some not, are differentiable from existential dreams and transcendent dreams. Okay. And the focus of the paper that so you have at hand is those two dream types, because they both have that capacity for a certain kind of metaphoricity within the dream that I want to accentuate. It's commonplace, and psychologists have been doing it forever, and before that, others besides psychologists were doing it. But commonplace to talk about dream symbols, dream metaphors, and so on. It is not commonplace to talk about the kind of dream, or excuse me, the kind of metaphoricity that I think we have found in existential dreams and transcendent dreams. So now let me take another step back. Partly because psychologists And psychoanalysts and the Jungians stand out in this context. They want to talk about metaphor. So what's new, Kuiken? Well, what's new is still clarification of what kind of metaphoricity is distinctive to existential and transcendent dreams. I don't think it is the kind of metaphoricity that people like Mark Blagrove, for example, are talking about. The kinds of metaphors that people in that group are talking about are largely one-way mappings of something from the dream, an image within the dream, onto something in a person's life. A is a B, right? And it's not as though that's uninteresting or unimportant, as much as I think in the existential dreams and the transcendent dreams, you're getting something besides that. You're getting dream images in which the dreamer awakens in a way that says, I don't know whether A is B or B is A. I don't know whether I'm in a hotel in France or whether that hotel in France is somehow in my bedroom, metaphorically, right? The room that I'm in is like the hotel in France when I wake up. Why is that? It's not just that the room that I'm in within the dream is like my bedroom. It goes both ways. A is a B and B is an A. It's that bidirectionality the metaphor theorists talk about as bidirectionality that I think is distinctive to existential dreams and transcendent dreams. Okay.
Can you give an example of that?
Okay, try this. Here's my favorite.
Another example, sorry.
Dreams, but here it is. Death is a fat fly. Okay. It's not from a dream now, but this is a bidirectional metaphor. People regularly are able to say, death is a fat fly. A fat fly is death. You hear that? You hear how it works both ways? A fat fly is death. Not just death is a fat fly. Okay? And it's that kind of metaphor that we have some evidence to this effect. That is that kind of metaphor that comes out of these two dream types. Goes both ways. And we have made some progress in development of a methodology that enables us to gain access to that bidirectionality. And I touch on that briefly in one of those impossible paragraphs toward the end of the paper. Okay. Because I think we can gain access to that kind of bidirectional metaphoricity in a way that can't be reduced to the more typical, some image in my dream stands for, metaphorically captures something in my life. That's the A is a B kind, more commonplace, I believe, but not distinctive at the very least. It's not distinctive to our dream types. But this bidirectionality seems to be distinctive to the existential dreams and transcendent dreams. Okay. Now I've had, it's been a long time since I've seen Mark, but I've had conversations with Mark about this kind of thing. And I said, come on, talk to me about poetic metaphor and the bidirectionality, not just the kind of metaphor that Lakoff and Johnson talk about, which for a while they basically said, don't try to talk to us about bidirectionality. We're not going there. So Lakoff and Johnson, for example, wanted to talk about A as a B only, not A as a B and B as an A. Okay. And I think Mark, it's fair to say that I think Mark doesn't want to do that either. He wants to talk about A as B, but this A as a B, B as an A stuff, not so much. So we've had conversations.
What is their objection about it? What do they not like about it?
But I think it's partly because there isn't an established methodology for gaining access to it. And I think Mark and others have done the discipline of service by showing how that can be more or less systematically done, such that you take an image from your dream and through a certain style of dream work, you find how it captures something in your life, in your waking life, right? A rich and important thing, fascinating partly because this is what therapists like to do, but it may also not be faithful to the imagery from certain kinds of dreams. It would be a mistake, I think, to reduce some of the imagery from existential dreams and transcendent dreams to this one-way path, as though it's all about my life, my waking life. It metaphorically refers to my waking life. No, it's almost like it goes both ways. Your waking life touches on your dream life and is how you even understand the dream image to begin with. And it goes the other way too, such that the image is how you begin to understand your waking life. And sometimes you get both. Yeah. So we another side of my research is comes out of studies of literary reading. We can differentiate these readers very carefully along these lines. I can say with some certainty that there is an orientation toward engaged literary reading that just doesn't go beyond A as a B. And there is also an orientation toward engaged literary reading, and it characterizes a group of readers who go A as a B, B as an A quite readily, thank you. So we, I think, have ways of accessing it there in the literary reading studies. Don't have that readily available with the dream studies, although I think this is where I would go next if I were 20 years younger.
It feels like A is B, B is A. It feels like that turnaround to B is A is, it reminds me of the natural framework of dream work, which is talk and also phenomenology, the sense of it's not that the metaphor has an obligation to understand our lives. It's that we have an understanding and an obligation towards the dream image as if it was other. It's like there's an otherness to those dream experiences that need to be met where they are, rather than trying to flatten them into just, this means this about me, this means this about my life, this is about the ice cream I ate, this is about, you know, the fight I've had with my mother, whatever. But it actually becomes its own, it has its own life, so that the fight with my mother becomes a way to understand what this dream is about and how it's moving in my life.
Yeah, and I think you're very close. And one of the reasons I feel confident about that is you refer to phenomenology, and you know that one of the phrases within the phenomenological tradition, and this comes from other contexts besides metaphoricity per se, is that the betweenness. There's this kind of betweenness in my perspective on X and another perspective on X. And somehow the interplay has an in-betweenness that is a very important part of how you understand the way a category is sort of given birth, all right? So I think you're on the right path toward the roots of some of my thinking as well, because I'm heavily indebted to the phenomenological tradition. Not just Paul Ricoeur, but Husserl is still an important figure for me. But if I'm not mistaken, that's where you are. But I may be wrong, because I don't, what did you call it? The phrase you used, was it natural?
Oh, well,
Natural
it's
framework.
the natural dream work, but I haven't studied that either. It strikes me that that's another group of people who are looking at dreams, trying to engage with dreams on their own terms rather than turning them into a conversation about this waking life. And so engage with the dream as the dream and see what that feels like rather than turning it around.
Let the dream sort of speak for itself rather than mapping it onto life. Is
Yeah,
that the right way to
yeah,
him to talk about that? I don't know the group you're referring to.
yeah.
Perhaps I should. Would you be willing to send me a reference?
Sure. Yes. I will find them. I can't remember their names, but I ran across them the last couple of years, and
Okay.
I just
Yeah.
Googled it. I can see some links on Google.
good, thank you. Oh,
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
put one in the chat.
Okay. Is she right about the title? That is, they call themselves sort of natural dream work? They
Yes.
refer to natural dream work? I'll find it too.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not familiar with it either, but this seems to be
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
Jing is talking about there.
Okay, that's helpful in another way, because I have another student who is determined to get closer to that in-betweenness in dream work, which could be a matter of giving the dream image a certain kind of referential integrity rather than making it a way of talking about something else, like my life with my wife or whatever it might be, right? So yeah, I'll get closer to
Interesting, because it feels like it's flirting with the idea that the dream is other than the dreamer. That the in-betweenness comes from there being two separate
Yeah.
experiences.
no, you're right on. That's right. It's somehow it is not just in the dream,
Yeah.
right? Any more than it is in the world. There is a way it is in both, right? And that's part of what Ricoeur tries to develop, and he does it in a way, as you saw in the paper too. It echoes of Kant. Kant was pretty alert to this possibility too. Not so much with dreams, but as an aspect of aesthetic experience. Right? You don't regard the work of art as though it is about something else. There is something about it which is self-referential as much as other referential. Right? So Kant was already alert to that. Ricoeur certainly, I think, develops it in a way that goes beyond the Kantian account. Nonetheless, it's not a brand new idea. I think what we were doing in these moments in our conversation is touching on something that, as we've just found out with the natural dream work too, it's around. It's not as though this is a totally untouchable, obscure phenomenon. Quite a few people have touched on it. And let me just change the topic in a way that underscores a part of this. In the transcendent dreams, there's a kind of in-betweenness that in the paper as well, I begin to compare with the way Martin Buber talks about I and thou. I don't know if you saw that.
That's what I was wondering. I was thinking about that.
But there's a reciprocity in that I-thou relationship. It's not just I vis-a-vis thou. It's I-thou in which I understand sort of the fullness of your lived experience, and you understand something about the lived experience, my lived experience. And out of that, there is us, I-thou, not I, not thou. It's reciprocal, right? And people who've experienced the transcendent dreams talk about something like that fairly commonly. Okay? And Ming-Ni Lee, I don't know if either of you knows Ming-Ni, but a longstanding student and colleague, she's interested in that as well. She's the one who brought that theme into the discussion of transcendent dreams, in fact. So I brought Uber along, but she's the one who was especially alert to this sense of aliveness in me and in the other simultaneously. So yeah, right now, as far as I'm concerned, what you're doing is touching on one of the things that makes examination of the transcendent dreams as interesting to me as it is. And it's not something that happens in existential dreams. What we're talking about right now happens in transcendent dreams.
The I thou?
That I thou part, yeah.
Okay.
At least fairly regularly, it happens with existential dreams. So if you go deeper into the bowels of that paper, you'll see that I touch on that a little bit. And we just submitted a copy of, or we just submitted a paper that that lays out more evidence for that kind of in-betweenness, if you will, in transcendent dreams. So don't hold your breath, because sometimes these things take longer than they should, but hopefully you will see something soon that touches on this again. So
I like it. I think that whole feeling of otherness is really powerful. And so do you see that that sense of otherness, is that also what drives some of the power of the existential dream?
yes, well, that's an interesting one, because I'm very open to talking about existential dreams in a way that accentuates the sense in which you are not at home there. You are not at home at the end of an existential dream. And somehow at the end of a transcendent dream, you seem like you are strangely at home. Strangely at home in a way that I normally am not. It's like I am and I am not at home here. Right? But that kind of experience doesn't come out of the existential dreams as much as, yeah, I am not at home here. Both in the dream and outside. I'm not at home here. I was in a hotel in southern Alberta, and I wasn't at home there. I was in a hotel in France, and I was not at home there. And as the dream ends, I am not at home, way down deep inside somewhere. I am not at home in myself. So there's a kind of not at homeness that a student that I'm working with right now is also especially interested in. It's separable from that. I'm not at home, but I am, right? That is more likely to be the case with the transcendent dreams. So she's interested in that notion, and I think there is, yeah, some really interesting work to be done there. Really interesting work to be done. So how are we doing? We're on item 2 on my list.
How many items are there on your list?
Actually, I've already touched on several of them, but that's because they came out of conversation rather than my list. And
yeah,
I'm not sure.
I really appreciate. I really appreciate this talk, because so much of what I've read made so much more sense now. Just hearing you talk about it. So thank you. And I felt like maybe I felt like I need more, and it's more than what the 10 minutes is going to do. I feel like maybe we need I feel like I need another session.
Well, I appreciate your comment. And by the way, I hope you can tell that this is not the first time I've this way to friends and colleagues and students. It's how I prefer to do things. One of the reasons for saying, rather than giving out my PowerPoint slides and so on, why don't I distribute something and then we exchange questions and topics and talk. And we're doing that, and I'm grateful, actually. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to learn.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah, and while you were talking about the different concepts, I was just kind of running in my head all the different dreams that I can think of, and just kind of putting them into different categories. And I'm really interested in just knowing that in that table in the for example, the sensory anomalies.
Yes.
So nightmares, in nightmares there are no reference to light.
Yeah.
What about
Compared to the transcendent dreams, which do have regular references to unusual sources of light, right? You don't find
or
that.
accidental with the darkness,
Yes.
light and darkness?
Shadows. Yeah. Like in the hallway in the hotel dream, the hallway of the hotel in southern France. Shadows.
But but what is nightmares? When I think about nightmares, quite often it's like monsters chasing me in a dark corridor.
mhm.
That's not necessarily one of my dreams. It's just like it's a what I associate with a lot of nightmares is people having that just monsters chasing them, and quite often it's
But pay attention to what you already have.
dark night.
What you've already acknowledged. It's the monster. Where it's not being chased that is the nightmarish anomaly. It's the transformation of a humanoid figure into a monster. There's a transformation there, all right, but not a transformation of the kind that you see in other dream types. So that we were somewhat taken aback by that pattern in these studies as well, as though nightmares are the only place that you find these morphological changes, these kinds of metamorphoses is the phrase that's often used. Is it only in the nightmares? Well, it may not be only in the nightmares, but it is more commonly in the nightmares that you have living figures that become monsterish, right? And they aren't necessarily that way to begin with, that they become monsterish. So those transformations in nightmares, I think, warrant closer attention than we've given them, partly because we're preoccupied with the existential dreams and the transcendent ones. But if I were to go in the direction that Ernest Hartman would have liked me to go, I would go to those transformations in the nightmares. It's not the central image of the nightmare. There's a certain kind of transformation there that often turns toward the terror of the nightmare. And we don't know very much about how those transformations occur. We don't know very much about their triggers, for example, in the dream. I guess what I'm trying to say is, as I still go through that list sometimes and I think, no, this can't be right. But I think the item for nightmares is still right, and that is that there are certain kinds of there are metamorphoses of several different kinds, often involving human figures, like the person who changes into a monster and chases you down the hall. But there are certain kinds of transformations of especially characters, but also objects that are more likely to occur in nightmares. Yeah, those transformations, I think, for anybody who's interested in metaphor, that's where I think they ought to go. How does let's see, what's the example I use in the paper? I can't remember it right now. But I give an example from a nightmare in a paper, but it's almost like there's a metaphor being given birth there in the transformation, the sort of the metamorphosis within the dream. It's almost like a metaphor is being given birth there. And the psychoanalysts were alert to that, right? They were quite alert to that. I talk about them as though they're past tense. They're not really, but comparatively they are. But those metamorphoses, I think, will stand out if you go back through the psychoanalytic literature, like Ernst Chris and others. Metamorphoses like that are important. Now, I'm concerned about time.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just got my message that I need to go, but this has just been so rich. Thank you. And I am going to read this paper again. I just really, I think sometimes we flatten dreams too much by trying to make them all, and I think there's a reason why we do that, and I think it's okay to tame dreams sometimes by saying you are here to serve me, but this whole sense of I am here also to be in relation with you is enlivening in itself.
Well, I hope you understand that this has been a conversation for me as well. In other words, it's the to and fro that makes a great deal of difference to me. When I think back on this session tomorrow, I'll say, boy, am I glad I didn't do a PowerPoint presentation.
Me too. Oh, I hope we get to
Indeed.
talk again. This has been really good.
Yeah, it's been a treat. So thank you both.
Yeah, Dong, and if you're open to it, I love to touch base afterwards and maybe reach out and possibly schedule another meeting and invite other members. And this has been phenomenal.
Yeah, if you're tempted by that and others are too, I'm open. Okay.
Nice.
Okay,
Thank
wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. And
Yes.
Take care of yourselves.
enlightening us, with this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Be well. This was
Okay.
great.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, you too. Bye for now.